let's get into our final section of today's session, and one that might be a little bit anticipated for you guys, which is all about the external exam. This is the EA1, your analytical essay. And we get to leave criticism behind. We're not interested in engaging with it in this particular task. The examination is an analytical response to a literary text from the prescribed text list in the form of an analytical essay for an audience with a deep understanding of the text. The purpose is to communicate an informed and critical perspective in response to an unseen question or task on a text studied in depth in Unit 4. So, really important, informed and critical perspective in response to an unseen question. So it is entirely in your hands. The argument, the thesis in this essay has to be entirely your own and your response to a text and everything that is included within it. So we're not concerned about what other people think. Instead, it is entirely up to us to form our own argument, our own perspective, and argue it consistently throughout the piece. That is the role of this task. All right, let's talk about the thesis, because the thesis really is the ultimate golden goose in this task. In this task, you're the ultimate authority, so no more external critic. Just as IA3 encourages you to bring a wholly unique and independent perspective to your writing, so too does the EA expect you to guide the analysis. So a thesis in the first task, the critic-based task, might sound a little something like this. Heart of Darkness has been widely contested, with many arguing that the text is marred by racist undertones. However, Critic X proffers that Conrad's language choices throughout the novella challenge the veneer-like quality of imperialist civilization. Critic X's notion is wholly correct, as supported by Conrad's exploration of the fallacy of principles through the opposing ideology and execution of imperialism. So, what particular elements of that make it a thesis for the first task? Well, first off, it's unnecessarily wordy. It's really long. You're discussing a critic and you're bringing in their perspective as well as your own. Whereas in reality, this is the kind of thesis that you would find yourself exploring in your own external task. Shakespeare highlights loyalty as a pivotal force in King Lear by condemning the disintegration of familial bonds and social order. The first thesis uses the critic. In the second, you're standing on your own 2 feet. And beyond this, the essay really is just an essay. There's no secret sauce for this task. It is the same one that you have done so many times throughout your career in literature and English. All right, what key elements of the thesis are we highlighting here? So, using the author's name in the thesis. That is so important. Being able to note, like, you are highlighting a key intentional choice that the author has made. This is very clever, because that means that every time you refer back to the author throughout your work, you're inadvertently referring back to your thesis as well. So Shakespeare highlights loyalty as a pivotal force in King Lear by condemning the disintegration of familial bonds and social order. So you're saying that Shakespeare highlights loyalty, and he also condemns the disintegration of familial bonds and social order. So it's important that you have key action words in your thesis as well, which indicates that you have an active argument. You're not just saying like, oh, it includes symbolism, or it has allegory in it, or it has illusion in it. No, there are key elements that are pushing this task forward. There is condemnation. There is the highlighting of key tasks. And also, the thesis will be answering the question directly by referring to key elements, so such as the theme. You could guess that this is responding to a question about theme, a theme-based question, perhaps about loyalty or something like familial bonds as well. All right, how to consider and approach the humble unseen question. So First up, as we mentioned earlier, there are sort of 5 types of questions that you'll typically encounter in unseen question-based exams, and these are the 5. So the example might be author's intent, so what the author is trying to achieve within the writing of the story. It could be Shakespeare posits that power is a corrupting force in the Tempest. Do you agree? Theme-based questions, such as how is the disfiguration of the American dream represented in The Great Gatsby, the theme there being the American dream. Aesthetic feature-based questions, so to what end do the storm scenes in King Lear reflect the tortured state of Britain? Character-based questions, so how is Kurtz a metonym for imperialism in Conrad's Heart of Darkness? And relationship-based questions. Analyze the effect of Mr. Rochester's manipulation on the character of Jane in Jane Eyre. So all of these questions are could be linked to other different question types, but these are the basic structures. And so as you're preparing for this task, these are the kind of things you need to be looking out for in your analysis and in your annotations. Author's intent, themes, aesthetic features, characters, and relationships. When students ask me the way that I prepared for my task, I used practice questions all the time. My number one study technique for this task was as follows. I got as long a list of practice questions as I could possibly find. I took a whole bunch of practice questions from my teacher. She compiled some for me, but I also went online and looked for them there as well. The great thing about the text that you will be studying for this task is that they have absolutely guaranteed been studied by a whole bunch of people before. So there will be practice or exemplar essay questions for them online, or you could even write your own. That could be a cool way to test your understanding of the structure of questions or the kinds of themes and relationships or characters that are important in the story as well. So compile the longest list of questions as possible and then pop them all into a random number generator. Then get the random number generator to spit out, a random number, and pick that corresponding question. Then set yourself up in exam conditions, put 15 minutes on the clock, and try and write a full plan based on that question without any of your notes. A full plan needs to include a polished thesis, so the actual thesis that you would write on your exam paper, topic sentences for your body paragraphs, the evidence that you would include within those body paragraphs. And then, if you have time, dot point analysis for each piece of evidence, as well as audience positioning, cohesive devices to link those paragraphs together, and a big concluding statement that sort of ties the whole piece together and indicates that the thesis has been proven. So the more you can practice that, the easier it will be to walk into that exam room, to ease the stress and worry of an exam, and to make things a little bit easier to stomach. So just practice that as much as possible. And you can, if you write a big long list of practice questions, you can practice that as many times as you would like. And you would be shocked at how much confidence it builds in you heading towards an unseen question within exam conditions. All right. The next thing I wanted to chat about is memorization. It's really important that you don't go into the room with a memorized essay in mind. It will end up as a patchwork essay as you try and force it to fit the question that you are being asked. There is just no way of being able to guess accurately what the question is going to be. You won't be able to guess it based on past questions that they have asked. You're not going to guess it based off what your best friend's cousin's older sister's husband told you it might be. Instead, you need to think about how you can equip yourself to deal with the unseen question element. So doing those practice plans based on a whole bunch of practice questions is kind of a way to go. But what you need to do in terms of memorization instead is to memorize key evidence, and if you so desire, maybe a basic introduction as well. Now, your basic introduction includes background sentences where you introduce the key elements of a text as well as a key synopsis, your thesis, and then the preview of your points. So you can basically memorize the first two sentences of that introduction, those background sentences, if you like. So rather than wasting time writing genetic theses to memorize, practice your broad skill set, practice coming up with broad ideas, and then trust yourself. This task is the culmination of months and months and months of work. It's actually the culmination of years of work over all the time that you've studied literature. So it's so important that you trust yourself as you head into this exam. All right, let's talk timing within the exam room. When you're in the exam room, you have 15 minutes to plan and 120 to use however you see fit. Once you have a plan, stick to it. If you start heading off on different tracks, particularly in regards to things like your thesis, your essay will just come convoluted and complicated, and the marker won't know exactly what you're trying to say. So instead, stick to your plan. If you have a full plan, it is really helpful in terms of things like writer's block. You can just refer to it, you know what you need to write next, and you can go ahead and write it down. If you do run into a roadblock and you really can't think of what to say next, it's okay. It's important that you don't panic. You just leave a chunk of space on the exam paper, move on to the next thing you know how to write, and then come back to it later. If you run out of space in that allotted section that you have left for yourself, mark really carefully with an asterisk and then go to your spare paper, mark another asterisk, and fill in the rest of your details that you need to include there. It's really important as you do that you write to whoever is marking your work that that's what you're doing. So paragraph completed on page whatever, and then on that spare page where you've written the rest of your paragraph, write continuation of paragraph such and such. Just so everything is really clear. You don't want that to be confusing for people. They're obviously going to do their best to understand and look for what you've written there, but you don't want them to have to work for it. So just make it as simple and as straightforward as possible. Have a wrap-up sentence in mind. So kind of know what you're going to say at the end of the conclusion. Typically, you like to have something quite broad that talks about the broad themes of the text rather than the specific ones that you've been exploring within your essay. So talk about the broader impact that the text has on people, what it encourages people to think, how it explores key contemporary ideas and things like that. And practice writing full essays to identify trouble spots. So you can practice writing plans as something that you do more often, something that's easier and a little bit more straightforward. But I would encourage you once or twice to practice writing a full essay in exam conditions. It acts as a bit of a diagnostic tool to indicate where you might struggle with things and what you find easy. And you might be surprised at what you learn within those sessions. You might find that you have more trouble with writing an introduction than you thought you would. And so you have to put a little bit more thought in coming up with a thesis. Or you might find that you struggle a little bit more with writing topic sentences or writing a strong conclusion. Or you might find that linking analysis and audience positioning together isn't as straightforward as you thought it was. The best thing to do is to try and practice doing this as early as possible so you have time to resolve those issues. You have time to go and find someone who can help you resolve those issues as well. So definitely go ahead and do that. And the other side of the coin as well is that it will help you do things like practice writing over a long period of time, ensures that your handwriting is really strong, ensures that your spelling is really strong as well. The other thing that I don't have on this slide but is really important is editing. So let's just check that it's not on my next slide. No, yeah. Editing is really important. So I know and I understand the temptation at the end of a long exam to just fling your pen down, throw the exam at one of the moderators and just flee the room, never to think about it again. But it is really important that you go through and proofread carefully, because the last thing you want is to have all of these beautiful ideas down on the page and then you get your marks back and you've been knocked down for something really trivial like not having your commas used correctly or misspelling some words too many times or not having clear enough distinctions between your paragraphs. Like, that is such a tragedy. So be really intentional, go through carefully. For your exam, you might even want to go to the extent of taking your finger and running it along each line to ensure that you have got everything nicely in place and that everything is as it should be. The other thing about exams is that if you run into a roadblock and you're starting to feel really overwhelmed, then actually take a moment to collect yourself. So put your pen down, just sit there. You can even close your eyes and take a few deep breaths to just recenter yourself and get back on track. It is worth taking that 30 seconds to just calm down, breathe, remind yourself that you so totally have this, than to try and muscle through, push through, and threaten the idea of burnout or being really, really panicked. So just take the time to breathe, sit through it, and that will definitely help. The last thing that I want to say about timing and things in the exam is that once before you go in, try not to think too hard about what you're going to do when you're in there. Just have the moment, be like, okay, we're about to do this. Honestly, be grateful that it's almost over, and then you can go in and get started. So don't try not to get too caught up in your head. All right, we talked about planning a little bit earlier, but it's worth revisiting again. How do you plan well? So be sure to unpack the question in detail once you get it. It is so important that you understand exactly what it is asking you, and take some of the key words from that question and put it in the thesis itself. Make sure you get your perspective down on the page. Now, it's important to put keywords from the question in the thesis because it proves to the marker that you are answering the question directly, and you can use those keywords when you're linking back to your thesis throughout your essay to indicate that everything is flowing together nicely and you're synthesizing well. Make sure you get all of your points down on the page. So this comes in the form of topic sentences, and then you can expand and you can do dot points based on that micro flow that we talked about earlier. The what, so how, so now structure. And on your page, on your planning page, you should have links clearly displayed using arrows. So indicate how you're connecting ideas together, and it'll allow you to see, okay, does this logic actually make sense? Does this argument make sense? Do my points make sense in this order? Do I have my strongest point first for body paragraph 1, and then am I building on it in my next paragraphs? Write down your memorized information to free up brain space. So I know that so many of you will be holding like 12 to 15 memorized Shakespearean quotes in your head. Get them down onto the piece of paper so you don't have to try and keep holding them there. Write them down on the page, and then you don't have to think about memorizing, and you can dedicate as much brain space as possible to going ahead and writing the actual essay itself. And leave time to edit at the end. That is how you plan well in exam conditions. Get as much detail down on the page as possible within the 15 minutes. And if you don't have everything down on the page, but the planning time is over, it can be well worth it to spend an extra 5 minutes filling out your plan, because really your plan is 80% of the essay. It's all of the ideas down. If you have all of that analysis, all of that audience positioning, all of those connections, all of those broad links down on the page within 20 minutes, then you have so much time to be translating that into a piece of work that you're really proud of. So that is planning well.